good now.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So thanks for having me. I think this club is a great idea. Thanks, Yumna, Jessica, everybody for organizing it. I think it's really important that computer science undergrads, like in addition to their technical skills, like have these spaces to talk about ethical issues, even if it's just for like an hour or 2 hours a week. Having the having thoughtful reflections on the technologies you're developing, I think is really important. So I'm very happy to be delivering this. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Coyne. If you've been in the computer science program, you might recognize me from embedded ethics modules. That's basically kind of the embedded ethics guy in the computer science department. So I teach, I'm half in the philosophy department and half in the computer science department. So I teach ethics courses in the philosophy department, but I'm also kind of the chief ethicist in this embedded ethics program. And I guess, part of the reason why I do this embedded ethics is that I was also a STEM undergrad. So I wasn't in computer science exactly. My undergrad was in math, applied math. But I wound up taking, some computer science courses and doing applied mathy kind of computing stuff. So I care a lot about computing. And I think it's, really, it's probably the most interesting place to be doing ethics. In many other places, like the ethical issues don't change over time. Like most of the central questions of ethics and political philosophy are kind of timeless. But in computer science, things are changing really rapidly. And computer science that seems to be giving us capabilities that really transform what's like they transform the real world, the material world, in ways that I think actually are surprising and require like novel ethical thinking. So that's kind of my background. So what I'm going to present today is a first version of what I think is right now maybe our most exciting module, well, going to be our most exciting module. It's for an upper fourth year class in natural language processing. And so it's about anthropomorphization. So like if you've been to other embedded ethics modules, you'll know that there's going to be some chunk of this where I'm talking, but I would like also for you to, we'll have some spaces for you to kind of have some conversations amongst yourselves. So it'll be a mix of me talking, you talking amongst yourselves, and all of us talking together for the next hour or so. So let's dig in. So the topic of this module is anthropomorphization. So we're going to talk about what that is in just a second, but this is mostly going to be about the way that anthropomorphization is used in like computational and statistical models of language, and the kinds of products that you can make using computational and statistical models of language. So LLMs, by far the most famous example of this, things like ChatGPT, is basically at its core a statistical model of language, right? It takes a big corpus of text and makes statistical predictions on what should come next, given a prompt. Language translation works kind of in a similar way. Like there was a time when language translation was kind of done in a mechanical sort of way based on, giving a machine rules and having it execute the rules. But the best kinds of language translation now are done through statistical modeling, through machine learning techniques. And likewise with speech synthesis. So you want to take a text and have a computer say it out loud. Well, again, you use machine learning techniques and apply them to the audio qualities of clips. Okay. We're going to be interested in those, especially those kind of artifacts, LLMs, which produce written text, speech synthesis, which produces audio text. Okay, so let's go back to our topic for just a second. So a system, we're going to talk about anthropomorphization today. Now, what that means is that a system that has features that make it appear to be human is anthropomorphic. So the origin of that, if you split it apart, anthropos in the ancient Greek means human, morpha means form. So sometimes if you're creating a program that produces text or produces speech, you kind of have a choice of whether to anthropomorphize that created text or speech or not. So should you make it seem more or less human? So what we're going to talk about is some of the kind of cues that anthropomorphics, that the cues that humans respond to that make users treat something as anthropomorphic, and some of the moral questions around adding those features to your code. So first, we're going to talk about the cues, and we'll see if there's. I guess there's not a speaker attached to this, eh? So let's see what happens if I play. Okay.
To get more information about this case.
Okay, can you hear in the back? Okay, I'll point it towards you just so you got the speaker. Okay, so I've got a couple pairs of clips here. And I'll just ask, first of all, this one should be pretty easy. The first one should be pretty easy. But one's kind of your standard old school robotic voice. And the other is the AI generated version of it. So let's see if you can tell the difference. So here's the first one.
To get more information about this, please call immediately on our department number 202-470-256.
To inform you that the IRS is filing a lawsuit against you. To get more information about this case file, please call immediately on our department number 202-470-2565.
Okay, so one of them kind of robotic-like, the other AI generated and filled with kind of more human clues. Okay, so we'll come back to that set in just a second. But here's an actual puzzle for you. Okay, so now I've got an AI version, different voice, and I had one of my TAs record exactly the same clip. So let's see if you could tell the difference.
To inform you that the IRS is filing a lawsuit against you. To get more information about this case file, please call immediately on our department number 202-470-2565.
Okay, so that's one clip.
The IRS is filing a lawsuit against you. To get more information about this case file, please call immediately on our department number 202-470-2565.
So which one was the AI and which one was the actual human being? Do you want to hear them again, or? So how many people thought the first one of that was the AI? Okay, and how many? So what was the kind of clue for you? Ah, good. Okay, so if it wasn't for the background noise, so right. Okay, so if you hadn't had the benefit of that one, okay.
The human one, there was a bit of a hesitation at the beginning, so it wasn't like.
Good. Okay. Okay, so there's our first example of an anthropomorphic technique, is introducing kind of intentionally like some kind of hesitation right at the start. That AI voice spoke with like unwavering confidence, whereas the human being was, well, I mean, I had my TA like record like something about taxes, it's like tax fraud. So of course he was going to be hesitant a little right at the beginning. Okay, so let's go back to the first two. So, here's one that's plainly not human.
you. To get more information about this, please call immediately on our department number 202-470-256.
What's that? Okay, and clip number 2. Why is it not playing? Oh, right.
Filing lawsuit against you. To get more information about this case file, please call immediately on our department number 202-470-2565.
Okay. So what's the, so that's pretty obvious, right? The first one sounds kind of robotic. Second one sounds much closer to human. Like if you heard the second one, like in like a random phone call or something, you might be tricked by it, but probably not by the first one. So like, what are some of the things there that are making that are like, what are the elements of the second AI clip that make it more human sounding?
I think it's just like almost like, you know, how each sounds like the first one is just like it sounds like if someone's trying to use Google Translate to say it.
Right, yeah.
The second one sounds like someone that actually speaks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so okay, the second one has more up. The first one's very flat in tone, and like I guess some people speak flat, but in general people do like have kind of a variation in tone. Right. That's so the pauses between like are more variable. That's interesting. Anything else? Okay, good. Okay, so all these are kind of like cues that we pick up on to figure out that something's human or not human. So here's a summary of some of the things that you talked about and some ones that maybe didn't come out so well in the samples. So of course, like accent and tone sort of help to make the clip register as more or less human sounding. So kind of like warmth, like the kind of robocall version one sounded very cold, right? And when someone speaks kind of warmly, that is intuitively, we respond to that in a human kind of way. Also kind of a breathiness, like hearing more evidence of the fact that it's like a human larynx and a human like audio, like physiological system producing the speech. So if you hear like a little bit of breath, that often picks up as intentionally human. So all of you have picked up on are the disfluencies. So elements that break the flow of speech. So things like pausing, especially at the beginning of a clip. You know, if someone needs a little bit of time to get going, you know, a machine doesn't really need, an algorithm doesn't need that in the way a human being does. Hesitations in the middle, exactly the same. Also filler words. None of those had filler words in them, but most of us have some kind of filler words when we speak, like ums or hms or things like that. So you can intentionally, if you can imagine intentionally seeding some of those things into like the language artifacts you're creating. Okay, so everything we've talked about so far is about audio, you know, making audio sound more human. But what about written text? What are some things that make written text seem more likely to be authored by a human?
That's the combination of simple words with complex words and certain.
Variation. I hadn't thought of that. That's really good. Yeah. So like the equivalent of like the tone thing from the audio. That's great. Other thoughts? Yeah.
They were used like ChatGPT, something have very specific words that they
Right.
tell something not using those words and also suggest that's
Yeah, so as a like in the philosophy department and teaching classes, we've got like a little primer on like things to look for in student essays. And yeah, that's one of the tests. There are certain like words that or like repetitive phrases that AI generated text makes that human beings don't really do. Yeah, so that seems right. Anything else?
Like AI generated text generally follows more structured format. So like every sentence follows like some transitional word and a subject. Like it's all very grammatic.
Right. Yeah.
But now, if you like get a sentence, you ask ChatGPT and like change its style, it can also do that. So it makes it really difficult.
Right. So you could tell ChatGPT to intentionally make something like through the right prompt engineering, right? Good. So that is true. Absolutely. Like you can put in a prompt that says, make this more slangy, or make it sound like, make it look like it was written by someone who's lazy and put lots of typos in, and it'll do that. Oh, really? Well then, yeah, this might be out of date already, but okay, good. So some of you've actually enriched this list, but like slang or informal speech, like at least comes across as more human than really formal speech. One thing we didn't talk about though is the actual content of what's being spoken. And so the content often goes a long ways towards creating the impression that the speaker is human. So especially about how the system answers questions about itself. And so if you ask it, if you ask ChatGPT, are you human? And it says yes, that's also counts as anthropomorphization, but also the information that the system like spontaneously offers about itself. Okay. So kind of translating that into more specific techniques. So often, like some uses of LLMs will use the first person and some won't. So like ChatGPT pretty much never uses the first person. But if you play around with the chatbot will use the first person quite frequently. Or like certain implicit or explicit claims of having certain kind of capabilities. So if on top of using the first person, like a chatbot or an LLM sort of says that it has mental states, like it says, I'm happy, or I'm sad, or that makes me sad, or I believe that, or things like that, that's an anthropomorphic technique. It makes you respond to, makes you respond to the chatbot more as a human thing. And sometimes it gives explicit claims of being human. You can just say, yeah, I'm human. That very anthropomorphic technique. Okay. And finally, this one's not really about the LLMs itself, not really about the speech or the audio itself, but often like different kinds of embodiment make us perceive something as more human. So if you hook up, say, to an LLM or to synthesize speech, like a human face, even if it's just like a still image, but preferably not a still image, like something that moves kind of in response to the text that's coming out, that tends to come across as a lot more human-like. Okay, so we've got this cluster of techniques on the table, things, different ways of integrating anthropomorphic techniques into, say, voice synthesis, different ways of incorporating it into speech synthesis. Now, and you can imagine, like, if you're programming something, if you're working with an LLM, if you're working with a speech synthesizer, and these are the kind of assignments, by the way, you would work on in like a fourth-year course. I think in a fourth-year course, in the natural language course, they actually do some stuff with speech synthesis. If you're in a position to program those kind of things, you're also in a position to decide, like, kind of to what degree you want to use these techniques. So if you're producing speech, do you want to like amp it up all the way and make it as anthropomorphic as possible? Or do you want to maybe hold back a little bit and maybe not try to make it as anthropomorphic as possible? Or maybe even intentionally put things in that make it seem less anthropomorphic. Now, all of these will depend on the kind of uses you have in mind for the system. So a couple of questions to get the ball rolling about that. So just in general, like, what are some cases where a designer might want to anthropomorphize generated text or speech? Yeah. Okay. Oh, so why in a customer service bot?
Usually replacing
Right.
It's like place. Even if you know it's like chatting, like answers and questions.
Okay, so it'll be more readily comprehensible if it's perceived as a human being.
Also, I think it's just a format.
Okay, okay, good. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
In, like sales or marketing, like a lot of times we get like kind of almost like spam emails, and then we don't really want to read them if they're like too general. So it makes it more like in that sense, like people might consider.
Well, that's an interesting scenario. So right now the spam we get is like very clearly like, spam authored by another human being. It's like an email. But imagine like personalized spam from an anthropomorphized agent. That's an interesting thought. Okay, good. So here's a word that if I'm not mistaken, I have like accidentally coined fresh. So if there's anthropomorphization, there's also de-anthropomorphization. Now, of course, until very recently, no one really had to worry about de-anthropomorphization. Like what you were worried, it was very, very hard to produce human-like artifacts, right? And if anything, if it was going to come up, if the products you were making were going to be anthropomorphized, they were going to come up, that would almost have to happen intentionally, right? Like, if you were trying to create speech just from scratch, the robo voice is the easier thing to do using standard techniques. It's much, much harder to produce human-like speech. That was like the challenge. Why would you ever want to de-anthropomorphize stuff? But if you're working with AI, like, and say synthesizing speech from previous clips of speech, now it's almost like the default that what comes out is anthropomorphic. So now it might be that what you want to do or would have to do is de-anthropomorphize the text or speech that you're generating. So can you think of any cases where you might want to do that? Or any, if not a case, like at least maybe a reason why you might want to do that? Right. Okay, yeah, so let's go back to the two clips I played right at the beginning. So imagine your voicemail bot number one, standard voicemail, perfectly understandable, like versus voicemail number two. Like voicemail two is kind of like intense, right? Like to hear like a full human being is sort of a little intense in a way that hearing the voicemail or that the robocaller voice isn't. So maybe maybe what's going on in the voicemail case is it like it's routine that you hear it a lot?
Same every time, same sentences.
Okay, yeah. So maybe you want something that's intentionally dehumanized there, because you want the same thing over and over again. That makes sense. Other thoughts? Yeah.
And like any of these techniques, but like anything that you want to sound very formal, like you don't want to be like, hey, please pay your taxes.
Right.
You want to be like, pay your taxes.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's funny. Like really, so you're kind of walking through the different techniques. Like, do you really want the government authoritative speech to have ums or filler pauses or like kind of case by case there? None of those, you don't really want any of those anthropomorphic techniques there. Maybe you do want something that's kind of more formal sounding. It's interesting. Ah,
Like
mhm. Right, good. Yeah, so maybe you do want like those authoritative voices to not sound casual at all. And sometimes not sounding casual means not sounding human at all. Okay, good. So maybe what's going to come out of this also is like some other extra reasons why you might want to de-anthropomorphize things, or at least maybe not use anthropomorphic techniques to their fullest extent. So what we're going to dig into next are the cognitive origins of anthropomorphization. So why it is that that people tend to anthropomorphize things. And when designers kind of make their artifacts, whether it's synthetic speech or LMs or whatever, when they make it anthropomorphic, they're not doing it out of nowhere, out of the blue, out of nowhere. They're responding to a human kind of tendency to make things, to treat things as human. So human beings kind of naturally by default start to treat objects in their environment, systems that they're responding to, so on, as human-like. And what psychologists have figured out is that there's two different reasons for this. One is we'll call affectance, and one a little more obvious to parse is sociality. So I'll explain both of them. So first of all, we'll explain the affectance one. So imagine you're exploring the world, you're trying to figure stuff out. And so sometimes you encounter systems of different kinds that you just don't fully understand. So you don't know how they're going to behave. So no, suppose, for instance, you were encountering a laptop for the first time. You wouldn't quite know what to do with it. You can punch keys in, that sometimes sound comes out, it takes text, but it takes you a while to understand what's going on with the laptop. It's kind of for the first hour you're using it, imagine you gave that laptop to like the ancient Romans or something. For the first hour, it'd just be a total black box to them. They wouldn't really know what to do with it at all. Now, often when we encounter any kind of unknown system, before, as we're getting to understand it, what we do, especially at first, but often in an ongoing kind of way, is model it as something else. We try to model that system as something that we better understand, so that in order to help us make predictions about how it's going to behave and how we should interact with those systems. So this is what's called affectance. Now, to be clear, when we model an unknown system as something else, we usually know in it that it's not that thing we're modeling it as. So here's an example. Take pets. How many people here have a pet? Cat or dog? Cat. Okay, good. So some people model their pets as human beings. Do you understand your cat deeply? You do? Okay. Okay. I also have a cat. And so I know my cat is not a human being, but I also don't really know what it's like to be a cat. I don't really understand cats. I haven't really read any books on cats. So often what I do is I effectively model my cat as a human being. I know in my head it's not a human being, but I kind of treat it like a human being. I assume it's going to respond in a human-like way to a lot of different circumstances. It's not a perfect model, but it's like, it's an adequate model. Okay. So often, kind of by default, human beings, we model other things as human beings, not just our pets, but other things as well. We have this kind of, in an effort to understand the world, kind of hardwired into us is a tendency to model things, whether pets or otherwise, as human beings. Now, so what does it mean to model a system as a human being? Well, or at least what does that entail? So part of that is attributing kind of some uniquely human abilities to it. Okay. So what are some abilities that humans uniquely have? So and maybe it'll help to think of the pet case here. When I'm attributing humanness to my pet, what sort of things, what sort of abilities am I thinking that am I pretending that the cat has? Okay. Communication, okay. Feeling, okay. So I'm imagining that the cat has human-like feelings, good. Adaptability, like it can respond to new circumstances in a way a human being can, good. Yeah. Empathy, okay, that the cat can understand me and sort of understand where I'm coming from. That's a uniquely human capability for sure, that the cat probably does not have. Good. Okay, good. So here's just a set of 4. So memory, emotions, rational inference, ability to ask questions. These are human capabilities. Maybe some of them aren't uniquely human, but definitely things that humans have. Okay. So now we can start kind of use this to start thinking about benefits and harms of anthropomorphization. So let's suppose, again, we're modeling the system as a human being. Now, when it turns out that when the model system actually has these capabilities, this can assist the user in using the system, right? So take memory, for example. If I'm modeling a cat as a human being, and I think it's, oh, well, that means the cat has memory. That's useful because the cat actually does remember stuff, right? It helps me use the cat system, for lack of a better word. And so you can see where this is going with LLMs or things like that. You know, if I attribute that to an LLM, that's going to be useful. It's going to actually help me use the system better than I otherwise would have, because I'm attributing this human-like capability to it. But on the flip side, if I'm modeling a system as a human and it turns out not to have these capabilities, this can actually harm the user. So for instance, if it turns out, it doesn't have emotions, it doesn't have rational inference, it doesn't have ability to ask questions, and I'm kind of assuming that it does have those capabilities, this can actually cause me harm. Okay. So I'm going to first kind of switch it up a bit and have you maybe have a quick conversation amongst yourselves for a few minutes. And so I brought the handouts just to help you organize your thoughts. But here's a sample kind of chatbot. One example of chatbots that's increasingly get used is a therapy bot. So, and it's an LLM that's been trained to give therapy advice, to serve as a kind of therapist. So you tell it its problems, it gives you helpful life advice. You can kind of make out there, I'll give you some of the description. So can you give a little description of what you're making you feel that way? So then you say a thing. And then the bot says, so you're struggling with feeling low. Is that true? So you can see the bot's using a whole bunch of anthropomorphization techniques. And those anthropomorphization techniques sort of clue the user in that they're responding to a human being. Now, the user doesn't know, again, that the user knows that they're not talking to a human, but yet they're still sort of subtly led because of the use of those anthropomorphic cues to think that the therapy bot has certain human capabilities. So what I'll ask you to think through are just 3 questions here. So what capabilities do you think the anthropomorphization is having the user think that the system has? And then which of those are actually helpful and which of those are harmful? So, thank you for a few minutes and then talk about it.
Sorry, I was late.
Oh,
I was
okay.
walking from a seminar.
Oh, that's okay.
Boise.
Okay, so yeah, shall we talk about this as a big group? Okay, so we've got this there. Has anyone actually used therapy, tried out a therapy bot before? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like there's so many of them now. I think there's like literally hundreds of different therapy bots. This, as best I can tell, this is the most famous one. So, okay, so we got this bot, right? So it responds to user queries. It's obviously been trained in like it's the people who make the bot obviously do some extra work to train it, right? And maybe on top of it, they put special filters on top of what comes out of the LLM that's used to power the bot, so that it has extra capabilities. It sounds maybe more anthropomorphic than it otherwise would have. Okay, and the users are of course responding to that. They're like, okay, I see that this bot that's useful for offering mental health advice, it seems like a human being. I know it's not a human being, but I'm going to treat it like a human being. Like it's got these, it's treating it as a human being is going to help me navigate the abilities it has. It's going to help me better take advantage of what it can offer me. Okay, so with that as the preface, what capabilities might a user assign to the chatbot, therapy bot, that they wouldn't assign, say, to like Google searching mental health stuff? Yeah. Okay, so it has so capacity to understand emotions and therefore like some kind of empathy based upon it. Okay, good. Other thoughts? Yeah. Okay, so it's like they'll assume it'll function like a diary. Okay, so in a way, I guess that's like an example of, so yeah, that's a capability to attribute, although not an anthropomorphic one, I guess. Yeah, good. So it'll have a memory, it'll keep track of things. That's helpful. Other thoughts? Right. Or at least, yeah, well, it goes a funny way there, I guess. Like Google doesn't present itself as having a memory. It's sort of the opposite. Like Google does have a deep memory, but it we probably don't think it does. Yeah, exactly. Good. But yeah, intuitively, like when we look at this, when we talk to a chatbot, we're going to assume, like because it's presented as a human being, we're going to assume it has some kind of memory of our interactions with it. And we wouldn't naturally assume that about Google search, even though. Okay, so we've got some capabilities. So which of those capabilities are actually useful for navigating the chatbot's abilities? Like if presumably if like we're definitely not trying to demonize therapy bots here. Like a therapy bot, by being anthropomorphic, like in some ways is a more powerful mental health resource than Google search would ever be, right? And part of the magic of a chatbot is its anthropomorphization. You know, if it wasn't anthropomorphic, you wouldn't know to take advantage of some of its abilities. So in light of that, like which of those capabilities actually are true? Yeah. Yeah. So it does have some kind of empathy to it, you're saying, like some ability to understand your emotions. Oh, well, let's keep pushing on that because I think there's respects in which that's maybe what's you're hesitating is that there's kind of ways in which that's true and ways in which that's not true. Good.
It's true in the sense that after hearing about your needs, it wouldn't necessarily actually understand how you're working and how you it might be able to tailor what it says later on, or tailor its style of speech as well, leading to that in ways similar to human and that look
I see. Yeah.
as well to kind of demonstrate empathy without being able
So that's interesting. Yeah. So you might attribute that it understands your emotions to it because it's human. And it doesn't have that capability, but you're saying it has another closely related capability that really is all we really care about there, the ability to appropriately respond to your emotions. That's interesting. Yeah. So it's a cue, it sort of works almost like accidentally, but good. That's interesting. So that's the helpful one. That's maybe some of the helpful stuff. Does anything else come to mind? Like why the anthropomorphization of the therapy bot might be helpful?
to back to that. So want to have responses that are human like you don't, but you would feel more comfortable not sharing that with people. So kind of like getting that,
Yeah.
that it's not a third person.
Oh, right. That's interesting. So yeah.
Like on here, that I want to share this with actual other person, but I want that same.
So that's interesting. Although, so I wonder though, like so let's connect that back to anthropomorphization. Like you might think then that like the best way to get that feeling of privacy and anonymity would be to de-anthropomorphize the system. So, or maybe it's that it's not that it's human-like that's doing the work there, but rather that it's like not a real person. So I guess wondering, like, is it the anthropomorphic techniques that are producing that effect, or is it something else about the LLM or the chatbot that's achieving that effect?
Stems more from the user's like subconscious knowing that it's not real.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So I guess I mean, in order to have that effect, then maybe you actually want to kind of hold back on fully anthropomorphizing. Like you want some amount of anthropomorphization, but if you go too far, users might start maybe subconsciously worrying that they're giving their secrets up to this is something that feels too real. So maybe that's actually a reason to pull back a little bit. Okay, so good. So what are the risks for harm here? Okay.
So you get like this same like response. So because it's in chat, so that it's not.
Right.
But then you get the same reaction, and you feel like it is.
Right. Okay, good. So it's like because it's a chatbot, even though you're anthropomorphizing it, there's no real risk here because you're not gonna even if you maximize the anthropomorphic techniques, you're not gonna believe that it's really human. So the worry that you're worried about, what am I trying to say? You can always get the full benefits of the anthropomorphization without worrying that you're giving up your privacy to a real human being, because you always know that it's a human being. Right. Interesting. Okay, good. So what about some of the other harms?
I feel like the chatbot, they tend to train so well that they wasn't understanding emotions, but it also would be like extreme and nice to like the users, and they're very sensitive. They don't know how to deal with such extreme and nice. So also like the chatbot is able to exploit the user's vulnerability in a way that like it would provide it through just would advice in terms of people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's very helpful for the user.
I guess but I guess so. Let's keep the comparison in mind while we're thinking about that, though. So imagine, Google search goes and you Google search and somehow the mental health advice you get is go jump off a cliff, versus that you're pouring your soul out to a therapy chatbot and it tells you to jump off a cliff. So I think when you compare those two cases, the risk seems much greater in the second case than the first case. In the first case, you're like, it's Google search, I don't care. But in the second case, it's like, oh, have this kind of human connection to the bot and it's telling me to jump off the cliff. And I know it's not real, but it still somehow affects me in some way. So I think that's a useful case here. Right. Good, yeah. Good, yeah. So good. So there's the problem solving aspect and the personally tailored aspect. So comparing with Google search again, if you type that stuff, if you type in, requests for help on Google search, you're not really expecting either of those things. You're not expecting it to say anything particular to you, and you're not expecting it to reason about you. Whereas when you're talking to a chatbot, you are expecting that it's somehow taking your individual circumstances more directly into account. But it might not be. You could imagine a chatbot that's like giving you what appears to be personalized advice because it's anthropomorphized, or what will feel like personal advice to you, but really it's just spitting out the same generic stuff that would have appeared on Google search. Good. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Maybe it's too personalized. It sounds like when it starts to sound like a real therapist, maybe like I've seen in two cases when they actually switch out, maybe the user decides to switch out to a real therapist, and like the therapist of your friend can make mistakes, and maybe that doesn't live up to
Right.
like what they were used to. so they might be disappointed or like they would be like glued to this chat because that's like all they know. And you're like too hesitant to expand into other types of theory, or they will become more depressed when they realize that, you know, oh, I'm dependent on this fake chatbot or kind of therapy or like what might happen. And that could like have a physical, like mental.
Okay, so the harm there is the harm. So, so the capability they're attributing is, so what's the capability in the case?
Like it's a very personalized advice and then
Right.
like giving suggestions, sounding very like.
Yeah. Yeah, so that seems right. And of course, it doesn't seem like the chatbot's really doing that. And so, because it's not doing that, it seems like you are being harmed in some way. Even if and so interestingly, like the harm, there's maybe two dimensions of the harm here. So there's like potentially like a real psychological harm, but there's also sort of this like moral harm where now, even if you're psychologically happy, now your best friend is a chatbot. And maybe your life kind of goes worse in some way, even if you don't realize it, like in the way that, you know, someone who spends their life in front of a gambling machine is or something. Good. Okay. So let's sum up this part quickly. So, you know, what we're talking about is like one cognitive reason why people tend to anthropomorphize. And it turns out we can actually generate a lot of the benefits and harms from anthropomorphization by thinking about this. We anthropomorphize in part because we want to understand systems better. And we've got this natural human tendency. So when you see a chatbot and it starts like really giving you hints that it's human, you're going to be subconsciously led to treat it as more and more human, which means, as we've seen, makes you more likely to attribute human-like capabilities to it. So even if you will ultimately deny, like even if you consciously do know that it's not a human being, you're going to start increasing like your estimation. Like for you, the likelihood is going to increase that it's doing things like remembering what you said, reasoning about what you said, reasoning about your emotions. And as we've seen, it might have some of these capabilities, in which case, great, the anthropomorphization is achieving its purpose. But in other cases, it won't. And that opens up the potential for harm. So there's a second reason that psychologists have identified behind anthropomorphization. And this is just sociality. So sometimes another reason that we sort of treat things, construct things as human-like is just to fulfill a need for human connection. So again, that's, you know, often more likely what's going on in the pet case, right? Like part of the reason why I treat my cat as a human is to better understand the cat, you know, because I don't understand the animal mind. But also, you know, sometimes it's just me and the cat at home. And, you know, I fulfill a need for social connection by, you know, pretending that the cat is a human being, you know, calling it like cute cat names and like, you know, stuff like that, treating it like a human being. And one reason why that matters for the sake of like designing software is that users are, once that social connection is established, you know, users are more likely to trust the system with that connection. So like a couple examples from the literature here. So people do lots of research about this in like what's I guess called applied psychology. So when people try to figure out, like do empirical research on psychology of like consumer products and things like that. So one is like in an autonomous vehicle, you know, so some researchers there compared an autonomous vehicle that simply had a screen and visual cues for what it was doing, you know, kind of a standard cabin, versus one where the computing system that was driving the vehicle was anthropomorphized. So it talked about itself, it talked about where it was going, it asked human-like questions, it had, you know, voice cues, things like that. And users tended to trust the autonomous vehicle more, both, you know, in the general sense and in the sense of they thought they actually trusted the safety of the autonomous vehicle more. So they thought, okay, I'm putting myself in this car is making decisions, it's autonomous about where we're going to go, whether to merge into traffic or not. And the user trusted the anthropomorphized one more than the non-anthropomorphized one. Okay. Same with intelligent personal assistants. So if you've got like a, like an organizer or something, people have experimented with, calendars, like I think like Siri. So compare like a de-anthropomorphized version of Siri with an anthropomorphized one. And what people found is that it increases trust, at least in an indirect sort of way. People will give up more information to the anthropomorphized system, and they trust its accuracy more. They're much more likely to trust that it got recorded the dates of the appointments correctly, that it does things like that. So in general, anthropomorphization tends to increase the trust that users have both kind of in the system overall and in the accuracy or correctness of the system. Okay, so a couple last questions for discussion. So this is, again, a separate line of argument than the affectance line of argument, right? This is a different way that anthropomorphization affects users by generating taking kind of advantage of users' desire for social connection, which in turn increases the trust that users place in the system. So, so you've created your LLM, you've made it more anthropomorphized, you've created your speech synthesis, it's more anthropomorphized, and users are going to trust it more. So like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So what's like a way that the trust that's generated by using those techniques might actually be used to benefit the user? Yeah.
Like only like to consider taking that device versus it like the long time.
Right, good. So it does seem like, yeah, like assuming the advice you're offering is good, like assuming the advice would actually improve the user's life, like it's well-intended, useful advice, maybe it makes sense to use anthropomorphic techniques as a way of convincing users to take that advice. Although, so framed that way, you might also that's a good argument, but you might also see why someone might be reluctant to endorse that argument completely too. Any other thoughts? Because the flip side question is even more easy to answer. So what's a way that the trust generated by anthropomorphization might be used to harm the user? Yeah. Yeah. Good. So the spam bot?
I mean, if you think about like students who use ChatGPT to do their assignments, oh, are you sure it's like, and then when they start sound stuff like very sure, but like on the GPT sound like starts to sound very sure of their answers, then maybe they're spreading false information and trust in this.
Oh, right. Okay, good. So like just thinking about the trust of the accuracy of the answers in general. So if you person
that whatever information, they'll really blindly trust. Like they won't be like, oh, you need to back check this stuff, but oh,
good, yeah. Yeah, that's like, and this is like a big one with like ChatGPT. So imagine a version of ChatGPT that was fully anthropomorphized. It would, in principle, lead people to trust it a little bit more. Like right now, I think people are starting to get aware enough of ChatGPT that they know that's, what comes out sounds correct, but probably needs to be double checked. But if you anthropomorphized it, it does chip away a little bit at that habit. Okay, so a couple last questions, and then maybe we'll just have 10 minutes of free like free discussion, or what was it? Was that it? I think you planned for like some kind of like mixing at the end, or. Okay, so, I mean, we can actually stop whenever. Okay, so we'll do a couple last questions. So strictly speaking, I just want to mention, we haven't actually talked about, what we've been talking about are like benefits and harms of anthropomorphization, right? But we haven't actually kind of crossed the bridge from talking about benefits and harms to talking about ethics. Like, it's worth keeping in mind that those are technically separate questions, right? Like, to talk about ethics, we need to actually think about, like, is it right or wrong to impose these benefits or harms? Because, it seems like so far, most of the uses of anthropomorphization we're talking about have a mix of benefits and harms. And you actually have to do some ethics to think about, like, which combinations of benefits and harms are ethically okay and which aren't. Like, what makes benefits and harms ethically okay or not? Is it just, for instance, the balance of them? Is maybe the intention, like what a person's intending to do important? Things like that. So if users, here's one question to kind of start you thinking about the ethics side of it. So if the user is not deceived by the use of anthropomorphization techniques, and that seems to be true in most of the cases that we've talked about so far, can the use of those techniques still treat them wrongly? Can you still like actually wrong someone, even though they're fully aware that you're kind of, it's using the first person, you know that it's not a human being? Is there any way to like wrong the user if they're fully aware? Because one possible answer here is that you can't, right? Like if a user completely consents, if they consent to using the system in a completely understanding way, then there's no possibility for wrong there. So anyone, that's a view. Does anyone want to push back against that view? Yeah.
It's like specifically where the started, like using
Yeah.
like they want to.
So if you think there are malicious, or like, so if one view is that there wouldn't be any malicious uses, or if there are malicious uses, they couldn't be wrong. But if you think there's a malicious case, that's probably the best place to start in answering the question.
Honestly, I think yes. Like I feel like system through like a lot of times like you could be causing harm like just by having that intention. Like it's kind of, you can't predict what the user's going to like do with it. In this case, it sounds like the user's not deceived, but like chances are zero. Like they could maybe like on a bad day.
Right. Yeah.
They're not always the biggest at humans. Like they could make mistakes. So by placing that, it's like, but yeah, I think.
Okay, good. So I'll give you what I think, what the example of that I found the most immediately compelling, which is the anthropomorphized slot machine. So there is a whole journal of gambling research, of research on how to make gambling machines more effective. And so this is from that journal, I think. And of course, so one way to make people hang around at slot machines more for a longer time and spend more money at them is to anthropomorphize them, to get the system talking to the user, cajoling the user, like inserting any of the anthropomorphic techniques we talked about, makes people more likely to gamble. Now, again, the users are not deceived. Like they know it's not a human being, it's right in front of them, but those techniques still kind of work. And so what seems to be going on there is that even though they fully consent, you might worry that what's going on is some kind of like manipulation, that you can, even if someone gives in fully informed consent, you can still treat them wrongly if you're manipulating them in a particular way, or if you're harming them in a particular way. Okay. So I think that's a good place to end off then. Yeah. So well, let's sum up quickly. So what we've talked about, kind of, these different techniques that you can layer onto you know, like speech systems, you know, synthetic speech, LLMs that make them seem more human, that kind of take advantage of this human tendency to treat things as human when we don't understand them or when we desire kind of social connection. And those techniques are useful in some cases. Like often they're an essential part of, you know, what's called HCI, human computer interaction. They're essential maybe for humans to make sense of the complex systems you're designing, but they also raise risks for harms. And they can also be like just directly manipulated in wrongful ways. So, you know, technically there's lots of interesting problems here about how to anthropomorphize speech, how to de-anthropomorphize speech. Maybe you'll get to think about those as computer scientists, but hopefully at the same time, when you're doing that, you know, you think about the ethics of what you're doing too. Thank you.